The year was 2247, and humanity had changed in ways that people from older times could never have imagined. Cities now floated among the stars. Children were born on worlds that their grandparents had only seen through telescopes. The human race had spread across 12 star systems and built colonies on planets that once seemed impossibly far away. The United Earth Navy protected these new homes with a fleet of powerful warships. These vessels patrolled the borders of human space day and night. They watched for threats and kept the peace. Most days were quiet. Most patrols found nothing but empty darkness between the stars. Captain Daniel Hayes commanded the USS Sentinel, a dreadnought-class battleship that represented the best of human engineering. The ship stretched nearly a kilometer long and carried enough weapons to fight a small war. 400 crew members called it home. They had served together for 3 years and trusted each other completely. Daniel was a tall man with gray eyes and a calm voice that never seemed to waver. He had joined the Navy at 18 and worked his way up through the ranks over 20 years. He had seen combat twice before and lost friends both times. Those experiences had taught him that war was not glorious. It was simply necessary when all other options failed. The Sentinel had been stationed near the frontier for 3 months. This region of space marked the edge of human territory. Beyond it lay the unknown. Unexplored systems stretched into infinity, holding mysteries that humanity had not yet discovered. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Monroe served as the first officer aboard the Sentinel. She was a serious woman with dark hair and sharp instincts. Her job was to keep the ship running smoothly and to advise the captain on all matters. She took both responsibilities seriously. On the morning that changed everything, Lisa was reviewing sensor data on the bridge when something unusual caught her attention. A signal was coming from beyond the territorial boundary. It was clearly artificial. Someone or something was broadcasting a message into human space. She called Captain Hayes to the bridge immediately. He arrived within minutes and studied the readings himself. The signal was repeating on a loop. It appeared to be using human language, though the translation was rough and broken. Commander Park worked at the communications station. He was young for his rank, only 32, but his skills with language and signal analysis were unmatched in the fleet. He isolated the transmission and cleaned up the audio until the words became clear. The message played across the bridge speakers. Every officer present heard it. "Weak creatures of Earth, your expansion ends here. Send your strongest vessel. We will demonstrate your insignificance. You have been warned." Silence followed. The crew exchanged glances, but no one spoke. They had trained for this possibility. First contact with an alien species was always considered likely given how far humanity had spread. But training and reality were very different things. Traced the signal to its source. What he found made his blood run cold. A massive fleet of unknown vessels was waiting just beyond sensor range. Preliminary scans detected over 200 warships. Each one was larger than the Sentinel. Each one appeared heavily armed. Daniel absorbed this information without visible reaction. His mind was already working through the options. He could retreat and warn Earth Command. That was the safe choice. But retreating would take time. Weeks would pass before reinforcements could arrive. In those weeks, the alien fleet could advance and threaten 3 colony worlds with millions of inhabitants. He contacted Earth Command through the secure channel. Admiral Susan Porter answered from headquarters on Luna. She was an older woman with white hair and decades of experience. She had sent young officers into danger before. It never got easier. Daniel explained the situation clearly. He described the signal, the fleet, and the threat to nearby colonies. He asked for orders and waited. Admiral Porter consulted with her staff for nearly an hour. When she returned to the channel, her face was grave. Reinforcements were too far away. Evacuation of the colonies was impossible on such short notice. Someone had to respond to the alien challenge and buy time for humanity to prepare. The Sentinel would go alone. Daniel accepted the orders without argument. He had known this would be the answer before he asked. The math was simple. One ship against 200 was certain death, but doing nothing would cost millions of lives instead of 400. He gathered his senior officers in the briefing room and explained what they faced. Lisa Monroe stood at his right side. Chief Engineer Adams sat across the table, his weathered hands folded in front of him. Lieutenant Maria Santos represented the Weapons Division. Medical Officer Grant listened quietly from the corner. Daniel told them everything. He did not hide the odds or offer false hope. They would be outnumbered and they would probably not survive, but their sacrifice would give Earth time to prepare. Their deaths would have meaning. He gave them a choice. Anyone who wished to transfer off the ship could do so without shame. Escape pods could reach the nearest colony within a week. No one would think less of those who chose to live. Not a single crew member requested transfer. Adam spoke for many when he said that running was not something he knew how to do. Maria Santos added that she had not joined the Navy to hide from danger. Grant simply nodded and began preparing the medical bay for casualties. Lisa Monroe looked at Daniel with steady eyes. She had served with him for 3 years. She knew what kind of man he was. She also knew what kind of crew they had built together. These people would not abandon each other. Daniel felt a warmth spread through his chest, pride mixed with sorrow as he looked at their faces. These men and women deserved better than what waited for them, but they had chosen their path with open eyes and brave hearts. He returned to the bridge and sat in the command chair. The alien fleet was waiting. 200 warships filled with creatures who believed humanity was weak. They had demanded a response, and they would receive one. "Send our reply," Daniel ordered. "Tell them we accept their challenge." Park transmitted the message. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of human defiance across the void. "We are the USS Sentinel. We represent the people of Earth. Your challenge is accepted. We are coming." The ship turned toward the frontier and began its journey into history. Behind them, the colonies continued their peaceful existence, unaware of the sacrifice being made on their behalf. Ahead of them, an enemy waited with overwhelming force. None of them knew if they would survive the coming battle, but all of them knew why they were fighting. They fought for the families they had left behind. They fought for the children who would grow up on distant worlds. They fought because someone had to stand between humanity and those who wished it harm. The Sentinel crossed the boundary at full speed. There was no turning back now. The Sentinel crossed into contested space as the ship's clock marked the beginning of a new day. The crew had spent the previous hours preparing for what lay ahead. Weapons were checked and checked again. Shield generators were tested at maximum capacity. Every system on the ship was brought to peak performance. Captain Daniel Hayes stood on the bridge and watched the sensor display. The alien fleet appeared slowly, emerging from the darkness like a nightmare taking shape. 200 warships spread across his screen in a formation that spoke of military discipline and hostile intent. Each vessel was massive. Each one bristled with weapons that his officers could not identify. They called themselves the Dominion. This information came from intercepted communications that Park had managed to decode. They were a reptilian species that had built an empire across 47 conquered worlds. They had never lost a war. They had never shown mercy to those they defeated. Warlord commanded the forces from his flagship, a vessel called the Crushing Tide. It was the largest ship in the fleet, nearly 3 times the size of the Sentinel. I had studied human broadcasts for years before making contact. He had learned their language and their history. He believed he understood them completely. Humans were soft creatures in his view. They cared too much about individual lives. They hesitated to sacrifice their own people for victory. This weakness would be their downfall. They had no such concerns. Death in battle was considered honorable. Retreat was unthinkable. Chief Engineer Adam reported from the engine room. He was a stocky man in his 50s with hands that had fixed more broken systems than he could count. The reactor was running at full power. Every backup system was online and ready. Whatever happened in the coming battle, the Sentinel would not fail because of mechanical problems. Lieutenant Maria Santos coordinated the weapons division from her station on the bridge. She had dark hair pulled back in a tight braid and eyes that missed nothing. The Sentinel carried plasma cannons, missile batteries, and point defense lasers. It was enough firepower to destroy a small moon, but against 200 enemy ships, raw numbers offered little comfort. Maria had run the calculations privately. If every weapon on the Sentinel hit its target perfectly, they might destroy 30 or 40 enemy vessels before being overwhelmed. That assumed the shields were similar to human technology. That assumed their weapons were no more powerful than expected. Those were dangerous assumptions. The opened communication when the Sentinel reached the center of the contested zone. A holographic image appeared on the main screen. Warlord stared down at the bridge crew with yellow eyes that held no warmth or mercy. He was tall and covered in dark green scales. His mouth was filled with teeth designed for tearing flesh. Scars marked his face and arms, evidence of battles fought and won over many years. He wore armor that gleamed under the lights of his bridge. "One ship," said slowly. His voice was deep and carried a strange echo. "You send one ship against the Dominion. Is this courage or stupidity?" Daniel Hayes rose from his command chair and faced the screen. He stood straight and met the alien's gaze without flinching. His crew watched him carefully. They took strength from his calm presence. "You asked for our strongest," Daniel replied. "Here we are." A laughed. The sound was harsh and unpleasant, like stones grinding together. He had expected the humans to beg for mercy or try to negotiate. This defiance amused him. It would make their destruction more satisfying. "Your species has spirit," the warlord admitted. "That spirit will break before this day ends. You will scream for mercy and find none. Then your worlds will follow. Every human colony will burn. Your children will serve the Dominion as slaves. Your civilization will become a memory." Lisa Monroe felt anger rise in her chest. She wanted to respond to these threats with words of her own, but she held her tongue. This was the captain's moment. He would speak for all of them. Daniel remained calm. His voice did not waver as he replied. "Many enemies have made similar promises throughout human history. They spoke of conquest and destruction. They believed themselves unbeatable. Where are they now? Gone. Forgotten. Dust on the winds of time. Humanity remains." The words hung in the air between them. A's eyes narrowed. This human was either very brave or very foolish, perhaps both. "Then die knowing your worlds will follow," the warlord said finally. "Die knowing that your sacrifice changes nothing." The transmission ended. Red lights began flashing across the bridge as alerts sounded throughout the ship. The fleet was moving. 200 warships began advancing toward the Sentinel in a coordinated attack pattern. Daniel returned to his chair and gripped the armrests. His knuckles went white, but his face remained composed. He had said what needed to be said. Now the time for words was over. "All hands to battle stations," he announced through the ship-wide channel. "This is Captain Hayes. The enemy is approaching. They believe we are weak. They believe we will break. Prove them wrong. Fight for your families. Fight for your homes. Fight for the future of every human being in the galaxy." The crew responded with practiced efficiency. Gunners took their positions at weapon controls. Engineers monitored power distribution. Medical teams prepared for the wounded that would soon fill their wards. Lisa Monroe sat at the tactical station beside the captain. She brought up the battle display and studied the enemy formation. They were approaching from all directions. They intended to surround the Sentinel and crush it from every angle. "They are not taking us seriously," she observed quietly. "They expect this to be easy." Daniel nodded. "Then we will teach them otherwise." The first wave of enemy fighters launched from the carriers. Hundreds of small craft swarmed toward the Sentinel like insects drawn to light. Behind them, the larger warships continued their steady advance. Maria Santos tracked the approaching fighters and calculated firing solutions. The point defense systems came online with a low hum. Laser batteries swiveled to face the incoming threat. Adam watched the power readings from his station in the engine room. The ship was drawing enormous amounts of energy. Everything was within acceptable limits for now. But the battle had not truly begun. Grant waited in the medical bay with her team of doctors and nurses. They had prepared for mass casualties. Beds were ready. Surgical equipment was sterilized. Blood supplies were stocked. She hoped they would not need any of it. She knew they would need all of it. The first enemy fighters came within range. "Fire at will," Daniel ordered. The Sentinel began to fight. Laser beams reached out across the darkness and found their targets. Fighters exploded in bright flashes. The point defense systems worked exactly as designed, cutting down enemies with mechanical precision. But more fighters came, always more. The swarm seemed endless. Daniel watched the battle unfold and made his decision. They could not win by standing still. They had to move. They had to attack. "All ahead full," he commanded. "Take us into their formation." The Sentinel surged forward. The battle for humanity had begun. The Sentinel charged forward into the heart of the enemy formation. Captain Daniel Hayes had made his choice and committed to it completely. Standing still meant death. Movement meant a chance, however small, to inflict real damage before the end came. Lieutenant Cooper manned the point defense systems from his station on Deck 4. He was a young man with quick reflexes and steady nerves. Hundreds of enemy fighters filled his targeting screen. Each one had to be tracked and destroyed before it could damage the ship. His fingers moved across the controls faster than thought. Laser batteries fired in continuous streams. Bright lines of energy cut through the darkness and found their marks. Fighters exploded one after another. Metal fragments scattered in all directions. But for every fighter destroyed, two more seemed to take its place. The Sentinel's shields absorbed the initial barrage from the enemy swarm. Energy readings spiked across the defensive grid as alien weapons tested human engineering. The shields held. They had been designed to withstand punishment far greater than fighter attacks. Commander Lisa Monroe coordinated damage control from the tactical station. She tracked every system on the ship and dispatched repair crews before problems became critical. Small fires broke out on Deck 7. A power conduit failed on Deck 12. Minor issues that could become major disasters if left unattended. The first wave of fighters broke against the Sentinel like water against stone. Cooper had destroyed over 40 craft in the opening minutes. Other gunners across the ship added to the count. The enemy swarm thinned but did not retreat. Captain Hayes watched the tactical display with focused attention. The larger warships were holding back. They expected their fighters to weaken the human vessel before the capital ships moved in for the kill. This was a mistake. Every moment they waited was a moment the Sentinel could use. "Target the nearest cruiser," Daniel ordered. "All main batteries fire." Lieutenant Maria Santos locked onto a cruiser that had drifted closer than its companions. Her fingers flew across the weapons console as she coordinated the attack. Plasma cannons charged to full power. Missile tubes opened along the hull. The Sentinel spoke with fire and fury. Plasma bolts raced across the void and slammed into the enemy cruiser. Missiles followed seconds later, their warheads finding gaps in the alien shields. The ship shuddered under the assault. Its hull cracked. Its engines flickered. Then it exploded. Cheers erupted across the bridge. First blood had been drawn. The humans had proven they could hurt their enemy. But Daniel allowed himself only a brief moment of satisfaction. One ship down meant 199 remained. Warlord observed the destruction of the cruiser from his flagship. His clawed hands tightened on the arms of his command throne. Anger burned in his yellow eyes. The human vessel was supposed to be an easy target. Instead, it was fighting back with unexpected ferocity. He ordered his capital ships forward. The games were over. The Dominion would crush this insect with overwhelming force. The Sentinel continued its charge through the enemy formation. Daniel kept the ship moving, never allowing them to pin them down or surround them completely. Each time the alien vessels tried to close the trap, the human battleship found a gap and pushed through. Maria Santos claimed 2 more cruisers in rapid succession. Her targeting was precise and deadly. She poured fire into shield generators and engine sections, finding the weak points that every ship possessed. They had never faced an enemy who fought with such calculated aggression. Chief Engineer Adam worked miracles in the engine room. The reactor was running beyond its rated capacity. Power flowed to weapons and shields in carefully managed streams. He pushed the equipment further than designers had ever intended. The ship groaned in protest but continued to perform. An hour passed. Then 2. The Sentinel destroyed 14 enemy warships in that time. Cruisers and destroyers fell to human weapons. The debris field grew larger with each victory. But the cost was mounting. A plasma bolt breached the port shields and struck Deck 9. 17 crew members died in the explosion. Another hit damaged the forward sensor array. A third knocked out secondary communications. Cooper took a piece of shrapnel to his left arm when his console exploded from an overload. He bound the wound with a torn piece of his uniform and kept fighting. There was no one to replace him. The ship needed him at his post. Lisa Monroe tracked the casualties as they came in. Each name was someone she knew. Each death was a friend lost forever. She pushed the grief aside and focused on her duties. There would be time to mourn later, if any of them survived. Daniel Hayes felt every loss like a physical blow. These people had trusted him. They had followed him into this battle knowing the odds, and now they were dying for a cause they would never see completed. But he could not let doubt cloud his judgment. Not now. The crew needed him to be strong. They needed him to lead them through this nightmare. "Concentrate fire on the destroyer group to starboard," he commanded. "Punch a hole through their line." The Sentinel turned and unleashed another devastating barrage. 3 destroyers vanished in balls of flame. A gap opened in the formation, and the human ship raced through it. A watched in disbelief. His fleet was being humiliated by a single enemy vessel. The humans were not behaving like conquered people should. They were not breaking or surrendering. They were fighting with a fury that his warriors could barely match. He received reports from his surviving captains. Morale was shaking. The crews had expected an easy victory. Instead, they were watching their comrades die in numbers that had not been seen in generations. The warlord made a decision. He would lead the attack personally. His flagship would destroy the human ship and end this embarrassment. The crushing tide moved forward from the rear of the formation. It was a massive vessel, larger than anything else on the battlefield. Its weapons could crack a planet's crust. Its shields could withstand orbital bombardment. Daniel saw the flagship approaching on his display. He understood what it meant. The enemy commander was coming to finish the fight personally. This was both a threat and an opportunity. "All hands," he announced calmly. "The enemy flagship is engaging. This is the moment we trained for. Give them everything we have." The Sentinel turned to face the crushing tide. 2 ships of vastly different size prepared to clash. The crew worked their stations with grim determination. They knew the odds had just gotten worse. But they also knew something they did not understand. Humans did not measure victory by survival alone. Sometimes winning meant making the enemy pay such a terrible price that they would never threaten your people again. The Sentinel opened fire on the flagship. The final phase of the battle had begun. Hours of battle had transformed the Sentinel into something barely recognizable. The sleek warship that had crossed into enemy space was now and bleeding. Hull breaches vented atmosphere into the void. Fires burned in compartments throughout the vessel. Emergency lights flickered in corridors filled with smoke and debris. But the ship still fought. Chief Medical Officer Grant had not rested since the battle began. Her medical bay was filled beyond capacity with wounded crew members. Doctors and nurses moved between beds in a constant rush. The sounds of pain and desperate effort filled the air. She worked on a young ensign whose legs had been crushed when a bulkhead collapsed. The injuries were severe but not fatal. With enough time and care, he would walk again. She told him this as she worked and saw hope flicker in his eyes. Time was the one thing they did not have. The Sentinel had destroyed 43 warships over the course of the battle. Cruisers, destroyers, and fighters had fallen to human weapons. The debris field stretched across thousands of kilometers, but the cost had been terrible. 112 crew members were dead. Another 60 were wounded badly enough to be removed from duty. The ship operated now with barely half its normal complement. Those who remained worked double shifts at their stations. Exhaustion weighed on everyone, but no one complained. Lieutenant Ben Carter had died defending the port shield generator when a boarding party managed to reach Deck 6. He had held the corridor alone for 7 minutes until reinforcements arrived. The enemy had been driven back, but Ben did not survive his wounds. Ensign was killed when a plasma round breached Deck 7. She had been carrying wounded crew members to safety when the hull gave way. She pushed 2 people into a sealed compartment before the vacuum took her. Her sacrifice saved their lives. The names accumulated in a list that grew longer with each passing hour. Each name represented a person with family and dreams. Each death left a hole that would never be filled. Captain Daniel Hayes felt every loss with profound weight. He had written letters to grieving families before. It was the worst duty any commander faced. Today there would be many letters to write, if he survived to write them. The Sentinel had lost main propulsion 30 minutes ago when concentrated fire from 3 cruisers overwhelmed the aft shields. Chief Engineer Adam had managed to restore partial thrust using emergency systems. The ship could move, but it could no longer run. The forward weapons array went offline 20 minutes later. A lucky shot from the enemy flagship had struck the primary power conduit. Maria Santos redirected fire control to the secondary batteries. The ship's killing power was reduced but not eliminated. The Sentinel drifted now through a sea of wreckage. Debris from destroyed ships, both human and alien, surrounded it on all sides. The vessel leaked atmosphere from a dozen wounds. Fire suppression systems had failed on 3 decks. But the ship still fought. Warlord observed the crippled human vessel from his flagship. The crushing tide had taken damage of its own during the engagement. Minor damage compared to what the Sentinel had suffered, but damage nonetheless. This single human ship had hurt his vessel in ways that entire enemy fleets had failed to achieve. He could not understand these creatures. They were clearly losing. Their ship was dying. Their crew was being slaughtered. Yet they refused to stop fighting. They refused to acknowledge defeat. I had conquered 47 worlds over his long career. He had faced many enemies. All of them had eventually broken. All of them had surrendered or fled when the situation became hopeless. But these humans seemed to have no concept of hopelessness. He decided to offer them a chance to end this with dignity. Perhaps if he showed mercy now, the conquest of their worlds would proceed more smoothly. Broken enemies were easier to rule than dead ones. The communication channel opened. Appeared on the Sentinel's damaged main screen. Static flickered across his image, but his words came through clearly. "Human vessel," he said. "You have fought well, better than any enemy the Dominion has faced. I offer you surrender. Your crew will be taken prisoner and treated according to our laws. Your worlds will be given favorable terms of submission. This battle does not need to continue." Daniel Hayes sat in his command chair. His uniform was torn and stained with blood. Some of it was his own from a wound on his forehead. Most of it belonged to others he had helped carry to medical bay during brief pauses in the fighting. He looked around the bridge at his surviving crew. Lisa Monroe stood at the damaged tactical station. Her face was pale with exhaustion, but her eyes remained sharp. Park monitored communications despite a broken arm that hung in a makeshift sling. Maria Santos had taken shrapnel wounds to her shoulder, but refused to leave her post. These people had given everything for this fight. They had watched friends die. They had pushed through pain and fear and despair. They had held the line against impossible odds. Daniel knew what his answer had to be. It was the only answer that honored their sacrifice. "We did not come here to surrender," he told. His voice was steady despite his wounds. "We came here to show you what happens when you threaten our people." Stared at the human captain in genuine surprise. The offer had been more than fair. Surrender would save the lives of the remaining crew. It would spare their worlds the worst consequences of conquest. Yet this man refused. "You will all die," the warlord warned. "Every one of you, and your deaths will change nothing." Daniel smiled. It was a tired smile, but it held no fear. "You have already lost nearly a third of your fleet to a single ship. Our deaths will cost you more still. When you reach our worlds, you will find millions more who will fight just as hard. How many ships can you afford to lose? How many warriors? The price of conquering humanity will be higher than you can pay." Ended the transmission without reply. His clawed hands trembled with barely contained rage. This human had spoken truth. The cost of this battle was already catastrophic. His fleet would need years to recover. The conquest he had planned was no longer possible. But he would still destroy this ship. Pride demanded nothing less. The crushing tide moved closer. Its weapons charged for a final devastating strike. Daniel watched the flagship approach. He had one last card to play. It would cost everything, but it might just break the enemy forever. He began giving orders. The crew listened and understood. They prepared for the end. The final hour of the USS Sentinel began with a simple question. Captain Daniel Hayes asked his crew if they understood what he was proposing. He asked if they were willing to pay the ultimate price. The answer came without hesitation. Every surviving crew member voted to proceed. There were no dissenting voices. There was no fear in their eyes. They had already accepted that they would not survive this battle. Now they would ensure their deaths meant something. Chief Engineer Adam received his orders and went to work immediately. The Sentinel's reactor was damaged but still functional. The engines were operating at reduced capacity, but they could still generate thrust. What Daniel needed was a final burst of acceleration. Everything the ship had left poured into one desperate charge. Adam understood the engineering requirements. He also understood that this would be a one-way trip. The reactor would burn itself out, generating the necessary power. There would be no second attempt. He looked around the engine room at his team. These men and women had kept the ship running through impossible conditions. They had performed miracles with damaged equipment and dwindling supplies. Now he asked them for one final miracle. They gave it to him. Power conduits that should have failed held together through sheer force of will. Cooling systems that were barely functioning provided just enough support. The reactor core climbed to levels that would have horrified its designers. Warning alarms screamed throughout engineering, but no one moved to silence them. On the bridge, Lisa Monroe monitored the tactical display. The crushing tide was approaching confidently. Warlord clearly believed the battle was already won. He positioned his flagship directly ahead of the crippled Sentinel, ready to deliver the killing blow. Lisa understood the plan immediately. Daniel had not explained it in words. He did not need to. They had served together for 3 years. She could read his intentions as easily as she read the sensor data. Ramming speed, she whispered softly. Daniel nodded. There was nothing more to say. He activated the ship-wide communication system one final time. His voice reached every compartment, every corridor, every surviving crew member. This is Captain Hayes. In a few moments we will make our final approach. The enemy believes we are defeated. They believe we are broken. We are going to prove them wrong one last time. Our ship will strike the enemy flagship at full velocity. Neither vessel will survive. He paused to let the words settle. No one spoke. No one moved. Every ear was listening. I want you all to know that serving with you has been the greatest honor of my life. You have shown courage beyond measure. You have fought with skill and determination that our enemies could not imagine. Whatever happens next, know that your sacrifice will be remembered. Earth will tell stories of this day for 1,000 years. Maria Santos had tears streaming down her face as she locked the weapons onto the enemy flagship. Even dying, the Sentinel would fire until the very end. She programmed the targeting computers to continue shooting automatically. Her hands were steady despite the emotions filling her heart. Park sent one final transmission to Earth Command. It contained the ship's logs, sensor recordings, and tactical data from the battle. Future commanders would study this engagement. They would learn from it. They would be better prepared when they came again. The message also contained letters. 400 crew members had recorded final words for their families during brief pauses in the battle. Parents spoke to children. Husbands spoke to wives. Friends spoke to friends. These messages would reach home even though the people who sent them never would. In the medical bay, Grant gathered her patients and staff. There was nothing more she could do for the wounded. Surgery would not save them from what was coming. Instead, she sat with them and held their hands. She told them they were brave. She told them they were loved. She told them they would not be forgotten. The Sentinel began its final charge. Adam pushed the engines beyond every safety limit. The ship groaned and shuddered as it accelerated. Hull plates stressed to breaking point. Power systems overloaded and burned out, but the thrust continued to build. I saw the human vessel surge forward and felt something he had not experienced in decades. Fear. Genuine, cold fear. He screamed orders to his crew. Turn the ship. Evade the attack. Fire everything at the approaching enemy. But the crushing tide was too large and too slow. It could not change course quickly enough. The Sentinel's weapons fired continuously as it approached. Plasma bolts hammered the flagship's shields. Missiles struck the hull and detonated with tremendous force. The ship shuddered under the assault, but it could not stop what was coming. Daniel Hayes watched the enemy flagship fill his. He thought of his family back on Earth. His parents who had been so proud when he received his command. His sister who had cried at his departure ceremony. They would mourn him, but they would also understand why he had made this choice. He thought of his crew, the 400 souls who had followed him into this battle. They had given everything for a cause greater than themselves. They were heroes, every one of them. It has been my honor, he said quietly. The Sentinel struck the crushing tide at full velocity. The impact was visible from nearby star systems. A flash of light brighter than a small sun erupted where the two vessels had been. Energy released by the collision vaporized both ships instantly. Debris scattered in all directions at tremendous speed. When the light faded, nothing remained. No wreckage large enough to identify, no survivors from either crew. Two massive warships had simply ceased to exist. The fleet fell silent. 67 of their warships had been destroyed. Their warlord was dead. Their flagship was gone, all from a single human vessel. The surviving commanders gathered to assess their situation. The fleet that had arrived so confidently was now broken and bleeding. They had lost more ships in one day than in the past 50 years of conquest. The casualties were catastrophic. One captain suggested pressing forward with the attack on human space. He was overruled immediately. The fleet no longer had strength for conquest. They could barely protect themselves. The Armada, they retreated to their own territory and did not return. On Earth, news of the battle spread quickly. The crew of the Sentinel became legends overnight. Their names were carved into monuments across every colony world. Schools taught their story to children who grew up dreaming of their courage. Admiral Susan Porter attended the memorial service personally. She read the names of every crew member aloud. 400 heroes who had given their lives so that humanity could live free. Captain Daniel Hayes, Commander Lisa Monroe, Chief Engineer Adam, Lieutenant Maria Santos, Lieutenant Cooper, Commander Park, Dr. Grant, and hundreds more whose names would never be forgotten. In the centuries that followed, alien empires considered aggression against humanity. They studied the records of the Battle of Frontier. They calculated the costs of challenging a species that produced warriors like the crew of the Sentinel. They remembered that one human ship had broken an entire fleet. They remembered that the humans had chosen death over surrender. They remembered that none had returned from that battle, neither the defenders nor the attackers who had challenged them. And they chose peace instead.